Thank you. I thought I'll start with showing you a video. You will be able to see it later tonight also, or the coming 2.5 months in the exhibition at the Hasselblad Center. But I thought it's quite good to show it because it is connected to the talks, and it is also sort of an in route and introduction to my work. What you'll see is a 7-minute 58 video called Printing Press Heidelberg Speedmaster XL / real-time total solar eclipse, nightfall and exit. The first part is a printing press, an offset press, where a book of mine was printed in 2011, and I filmed the different ink tanks and rollers and mechanics of printing a photographic book of abstract pictures. It was the book Abstract Pictures. And I also recorded the sound of the printing press, and earlier this year turned that sound into like music, musified that sound, and then there is a cut to the second part, which is filmed this spring at the on the Faroe Islands, and since the film wasn't fully seen at the end of your presentation, I think it's good to see it here in full 3 minutes length. And the important thing to be aware of is that what you're seeing is actually not speeded up. It's not time lapse. It's actually real time, the very 3 minutes around the totality, and the camera is pointing in the direction of where the shadow of the moon is coming towards me at a speed of, is it 1,000 kilometers an hour? Something around that. And it sort of comes over you, and enough said. So let's have a look at that. I was lucky because it got very windy, and a minute later the tripod falls over and the camera lands in the dirt. I begin with the picture, with this picture, because the last time that I received a prize comparable to the Hasselblad Award was 15 years ago, the Turner Prize at Tate in London in the year 2000. And with the prize money, I bought this color photocopier. Because it was always a dream to own a Canon color photocopier, and not having to go to a copy shop. The photocopy was really at the start of me using photography, or taking charge of photography as my main medium, because in '86 I wanted to do a small zine, and was looking for a good photocopier, and walked into a big copy shop in my hometown, and they had a brand new photocopier called Canon Laser Copier, and it was the first digital photocopier, meaning it was a scanner which then printed the image via a laser onto the transfer drum, and whereas a normal photocopier, conventional analog photocopier, uses just bright light and a mirror to transfer the image to the transfer drum. And the analog photocopier, as we know, creates a very diffuse and not sharp and only strictly black and or white pictures. And this new copier suddenly allowed to photocopy in grayscale and to enlarge by 400%. And I quickly persuaded the people in the copy shop to allow me to manipulate or to work on the copier myself. And I sort of within days fell in love with it, and I was suddenly making objects, picture objects that touched me more than any of the things I was making before ever did. You know, I did forays into painting, drawing, making clothes, a number of media I explored after the love of astronomy got superseded by the love of London and stars, and stars more of the Boy George kind of type. And all the expressiveness that I used with my hands or voice or in teenage expression seemed pointless or not really go anywhere much compared with what I had discovered there with these photocopies, which were a miraculous transformation of an industrially produced sheet of paper, which is literally costing less than a cent, into an object of great charge, of great beauty, simply by a process of pressing a button and a technical, mechanical process being applied to it under my control and partially well out of my control. And to let go of a whole number of parameters of control felt really liberating and enriching, and maybe also more true and truly reflecting how I see my life anyway. You know, the gestural, traditional artist, painter artist in particular, or sculptor, is always a gesture of being in complete control of the artwork. Whereas, you know, I feel that my life is, you know, only ever to some degree under my control, and it is subject to chance and circumstance and accidents that all contribute to the life, and this coexistence of chance and control is something that I deeply have felt from early on, and maybe that is also the hardest to bear that one is out of control, but to embrace that as well, and not to fight it. I mean, to do as good as you can, to try as hard as you can, but also to know when to stop. And I say this here now as if I know always when to stop, but of course that is a lifelong challenge and something that I guess you never become a master of that. That balance, and that is of course also the base of happiness. You know, if you make peace with this coexistence of chance and control in your life. So this early digital printing machine in 1986 completely changed my life. I then moved soon after school. I moved to Hamburg and made a first exhibition in a cafe, and then after a year I needed more pictures to photocopy, because until then I didn't consider myself a photographer, just like Marek, who used the biggest camera in the world and never thought of himself as a photographer for 12 years. And I used my little telescope, and I somehow didn't think of it as photography, strangely. And so in '88 I bought my first camera, and then quickly realized that I can actually speak with the medium itself, and I didn't need this transformation or this reduction through the photocopier. But I think it's important to start, I guess, with the printing press and this photocopier, that the point of departure is really the interest in the object and the presence of the object, and that a photograph is just an amazing, I found it an amazing way to make a contemporary picture, to make contemporary art, because that was what I wanted to do. And so the interest didn't come from photography, from the camera, but that I found this object more interesting for me, more relevant for me than the canvas. And so I felt very liberated and at ease with this medium, which didn't use my hands in a gestural way. And so since then I've been exploring what this medium can do, and it stays a miracle to me to this day. I still am fascinated by it. How a photographic sheet of paper, color photographic sheet of paper, which in this size costs about €1, can be transformed again into an object of great charge, of incredible beauty and of meaning. And that is offering almost limitless possibilities with camera and without camera, because the paper, of course, in itself is a receptor. It doesn't need a lens. It only needs a lens if you want to make figurative photographs. But since the late 90s, I began to explore the potential of making pictures without camera. And in 2000, I started, I found a way and made this ongoing family of pictures, initially called Blushes, and then from 2003 called Freischwimmer, as this is an example, Freischwimmer 23 from 2004. And it is a picture made in the darkroom, completely dry. There's no chemicals or liquids involved in the image-giving process, image-making process, and then the photograph is processed also completely conventionally. And later, I scan the photograph and enlarge it to its desired size, and they are pictures which I wouldn't want to paint, because the brain, the eye, but the eye doesn't actually produce a picture. It is the brain, of course, that produces an intelligible picture for us, and the brain recognizes this as somehow a photographic picture. And the moment it recognizes that it's photographic, an association machine starts in the brain, and the brain tries to connect this to reality, tries to locate this, and in this way I use the human response, the default setting response to a photograph, which is asking the W questions, like who is it, where is it, what is it, when is it, something that I at times found frustrating in my career, that a photograph was met with immediate questions like where is it. I had that also in this exhibition actually. Yesterday somebody like saw this picture of a crashing wave, a close up of just water and rock and foam, and not meaning badly at all, no? But like the first question, the reaction was like, where is it? And when you see just as specific a painting, you would never immediately ask, where is it? So there is something with photography that makes us want to connect this to reality, and to locate it. And as I said, I was sometimes frustrated because I think this picture in front of you, that is the proposition. That should be enough to work with. And if there was more information needed, I would give it. But in return, these so-called abstract pictures use this and connect things to like inner body pictures, to skin, to astronomical phenomena, or to underwater phenomena. And it is an ongoing group of pictures where I maybe add like 10 or 20 a year. And the largest are these two Freischwimmer Ostgut, left and right, which are seen here at the Fondation Bayerle last year, and they are one is owned by the Kunstmuseum Basel and one is owned by the Fondation Bayerle, and they were brought together in this installation where the Bayerle invited me to arrange the room and choose from their collection to complement my two works. The problem is that they only have Giacometti and Matisse and Picasso, and so I could not be modest, however hard I tried. But these pictures were originally made and were hanging for 5 years in the Panorama Bar above the dance floor in the Berghain Club in Berlin, and since I have they were replaced after 5 years by another couple called Neutral Density. And the Freischwimmers were accompanied by a close-up of a female crotch, because the club was, at the time of its opening, Panorama Bar was predominantly gay, and I thought it'd be nice to remind the crowd of the other half. And by 2009, 9, 10 panorama bar has become predominantly straight, and so I hung a close-up picture of a man's back side, and thinking it'd be nice to remind them of the other half, and now, since this year, there is a third installation of two Sendeschluss type pictures, of which one you can see in the exhibition, and now I was thinking what could be the third orifice, and but it is actually the close-up and almost inside the mouth picture of the throat, and which is of course suggesting of many things that can enter in a long night, so nightlife of the underground type, I must say, because there are also terrible types of nightlife, but nightlife that is projecting a sense of freedom, of liberation, of subversion, has been of massive attraction to me since teenage days, and I've taken nightlife always very seriously, because it is fun, but it is also a reflection of human desire, of an idea of a utopian togetherness, especially as I experienced it in the late 80s with acid house and house music, and then from the early 90s with techno, where one may question how much it was the influence of ecstasy and how much it was the influence of a new era, maybe the end of the Cold War, even subliminally playing into this, that nightlife changed dramatically at the end of the 80s from being a show-off case in many cases, much more driven about by status and also clothes-driven, to a completely egalitarian approach that was just jeans and T-shirt was enough, and it was one happy nation under one groove, which was also then in '91 I did my first reportage for ID magazine, and it was entitled "Techno is the Sound of Europe," and it was really a time, I think important to tell this 23 years later, that there was an enthusiasm about Europe around me. I was living in London in my second year. Across Europe, people were really excited that there was this beat, this music connecting people. We were speaking one language, and the Maastricht Treaty in '92 was met with genuine excitement, and it was all looking forward towards a better future. And it pains me very much to see how the EU is sort of everybody's favorite object to beat up, and it's like an incredible peace project, and I feel like I'm a result of this peace project, and I think it's incredibly important not to let populism dissect and dilute and ultimately destroy it. this being together is possibly one of the other, like my biggest longings. I talked about the love for the object, for the printed paper, the study, the fascination with these objects that I make. But the other ongoing fascination is really about people, a love for people and community and being together and exploring ourselves in a fearless way. This photograph is from 1992 and was made as a group of pictures which was called Like Brother, Like Sister and published in ID as a fashion story, but it had to be written underneath that a fashion story. But where I wanted to explore an equal play of genders, man and woman, and for example, a picture which I thought was next. I had observed that toplessness in magazines by topless women was matched with topless men, but that's of course not the same level of exposure. And I thought, well, really equality would be a bottomless man, and so that was one other picture in this story, and this overcoming the fear of the body and the fear of one's own body, and taking it for what it is, maybe in all its ridiculousness, but sort of taking control of your eyes and fearlessly looking at what we are has been a strong interest of mine, and and connected with this ideas of nightlife and community is in particular an interest in free activity. You know that this activity is free, meaning also free of charge, and that is something that that can of course only take place in spaces, in open spaces, and that is something that I found increasingly disappearing in the last 25 years as inner cities are becoming ever more commercialized, and there is almost no open space, free space for non-commercial or subcultural activities left in cities like London or New York. And my work, I approach my work in multiple layers without ever thinking about that consciously or in a planned way. And that is the great thing about photography, is that all knowledge, everything you know, is present, is in your head in real time at the moment you're taking the photograph, and that is incredible. You know, it's on the one hand it is so instantaneous, but at the same time it has like your entire visual literacy at hand, at disposal in that moment, and you have to, of course, filter it through your device, through the camera, and know what this medium does and or can do for you, and that really is what I do. Like meet a situation, meet a subject, and play through in milliseconds or seconds or sometimes minutes, like all the reasons why this picture isn't possible. I start really the thinking process by thinking, is this possible? Is it possible to take a picture of this? And then I play against it all the counter factors, like say, for example, like a sunset is triggering this. It's like, is this possible to take a picture of it? And of course, the biggest point is, of course, it's not possible because it's been done a million times, and what's the point? And you can't possibly add to that. And of course, it's a complete kitsch and cliche subject matter, so even more so a reason not to do it. And then the other side in me thinks, well, but maybe especially because it's not possible, let's try anyway. Yeah. I live my life through my eyes, without camera, and I'm not looking for subject matter, but once a day or 10 times a day, usually more like once a day, something catches my consciousness, because it doesn't catch my eye, it's my consciousness that recognizes something, and then instantly this process happens, thinking, what are the reasons against it, and how and why could it be possible? And this is a good example of these various aspects at play at the same time, because I was here in New York, in Brooklyn, in a club called The Spectrum, in a monthly lesbian gay mixed night called Dagger, and I felt extremely aware that this is really the life, the nightlife that I like, that I treasure so much, where people are free in a fearless and uncontrolled but safe environment, and this is no longer possible in Manhattan, and I felt so happy to, because I thought since the late 90s that really New York was completely bereft of such subcultural places, but so happy to see that this is still found alive and well in small pockets, and so I was aware, like, wow, this is really amazing. This is that this exists and is so alive, and I want to. There is a drive in me to amplify it, to not to capture it, but I'm aware that this is special, and I am enabled by my ability to preserve this and possibly amplify it, but of course not wanting to disturb it either by the presence of the camera, and so it's a political picture for me. On the other hand, it is also a kind of part of a genre of pictures of hundreds of years of picture making, which is community, people being together, people celebrating together, and I see it as that. Again, not that I try to refer to art history. It's just that I've understood some time ago that of course, I'm interested in this, just like artists 300 years ago were interested in the same thing, because these things just are interesting, right? And we're dealing with the with similar issues and situations through the ever-changing filter of time and context. And that's, of course, the incredible thing about visual art, that it allows for infinite renewal and making new pictures, because new work, which who knows if it will be pictures, because the parameters are ever changing, they are never the same. And then I see this, like also, of course, I'm there and have to have this task, how do I take a photograph in this extremely low light situation? And I've in recent years have sometimes thought of certain pictures as extreme pictures, which are extreme because they just really would not have been possible 10 years ago or 15 years ago with analog or early digital media. And so this is actually also in the exhibition as a 2-meter size print. And this was taken without flashlight, with in almost like a very dark circumstances, with an extremely high ISO setting on the camera, and I always go to the limit of my medium. I find that is something I don't care about as a sort of technical sport, but it's. So it's a connection of what is possible on different levels, and then that this totally fleeting, ephemeral moment is compositionally so held together, makes me very happy. Because it's so, everything is so falling in flux. But it's totally held together, at least in my mind. These are installation views of the exhibition "Your Body is Yours" at the National Museum of Art in Osaka this summer. And it's well, you've already seen installation views now, thanks to Tom's exhibition lecture talk, and this is a room which was devoted to friendship and play, and these varying sizes and scales and media in my exhibitions. They're partially simply down to a certain economy of space. That there are, like, photographs are values. There is a content value that I want to insert into a space, but the space is limited, and so it is a constant sort of thinking game about distribution. How do I distribute this space, this given space, distributed towards all these potential voices and values which each photograph represents. Its value, as in color value, for example, and formal valeurs, content values, and they all add up. And I hope so. And on the one hand, to project a reality, a fictitious reality made of individual realities which have all happened in front of the camera, but to varying extents of my doing or not doing, and contributing and not contributing to the what is going on in front of the camera. And because it is such a wide-held instinct in I guess not the human, because there is no such thing, but I guess a Western or early 21st century or 20th century person, there is this strongly held feeling that a photograph is taken. A photograph exists the moment it's made. But what I experienced from the start, early on, was that photographs are made. They are literally made. They become objects. They are embodied images. And the English language has this difference between image and picture. And the picture is the embodied image in my reading. And so there, like a color photograph doesn't just come out of the camera. It doesn't come from the lab. It comes from the lab after somebody has interpreted the negative, or now has interpreted the data file. So every picture is actually the result of choices that were made, and this exhibition in Osaka, I titled "Your Body Is Yours." I think it resonated well in Japan, but it's of course a universal. It's so obvious that it's startling, because of course you think your body is yours, my body is mine, but how free is it from being controlled, and be it legal control or be it ideological control in terms of body beauty, beauty dogmas, where and how you have to shave your body. How in control are we? And in this exhibition, I devoted the vast atrium space to show or give an insight into an area of my work, an outlet for my work, which has been important from the start, which is the printed page, printed matter, as in magazines, books, posters, postcards, invitation cards, record covers, and there were examples of publications of various nature displayed, and 25 books also there to be actually touched by the audience, which is something Juan Pablo, my Colombian assistant who was with us installing, said of course would never happen in Colombia. We would of course steal them all. No? But in Japan, of course everybody looked at them most carefully. And so even rare out of print copies of books we showed ready to be touched. And this shows two of my books with Taschen. The right is Neue Welt, and on the left is True Study Center, which came out, which has the title True Study Center, even though it doesn't really deal with the group of works which then have emerged since the publication of the book in 2005. And at the launch of this book, I made the first installation of True Study Center tables. What is interesting about this is how it deals with surface on various levels. Naturally, the surface of the printed page, and the print. By the way, the offset print has an incredible beauty to me as well. So, as an art medium, I've chosen magazines as valid, equally valid outlets for my work. And when I've been able to design and lay out a story or a spread, then I see that as a work of mine. And in this exhibition, you can see also a number of magazine spreads which I designed this autumn, and they are, they only cost £5.50 to buy, but they are as authentic a work as one can get, and a fine hand print made in my studio is also a maximum of authentic work, which emphasizes different aspects, different qualities, like an extreme finesse of printing and fineness, and which is absolutely impossible to reproduce in the offset printing of magazines and books. And so I choose media according to what they offer to me, and I'm fully aware that not every medium can offer everything, and I don't despair over that, but instead I accept these limitations and rather see what the medium offers as an opportunity and to celebrate that in its beauty. And in this exhibition, you see, I think, about 8 different manifestations of the printed paper. And we've always listed what you're actually looking at under the title of the works. And I guess the interest in the surface of prints is connected with an interest in or an understanding that all I do, all I'm able to do, is understand the world and try to read the world through the surface that it shows to me. Because I've always understood that the surface is even though it is superficial, it's actually not superficial. Things look the way they look for a reason. That is in particular the case with human-made things. Of course, natural things also look the way they do for a reason, but social, political, economic circumstances, cultural circumstances are all inscribed into the surface and texture of the world that surrounds us. And that is really what I'm looking at and talk about in my work, and I found photography also an incredibly economical medium, allowing me to talk about a whole number of three-dimensional situations and observations and thoughts, all related to the three-dimensional world, but to do that in the much more economical way of a photographic print, rather than making an installation of, for example, a crumpled jeans and a study of the folds of a garment. I could also show that garment in a vitrine, but I found the photograph can somehow translate the thought in a sort of more economical, meaning modest way, which I like. And this understanding that surface, if well observed and interrogated, is always saying something about what went into its making. Is this picture on the left, which was taken outside London's King's Cross station, and it's called Anti-Homeless Device, which is an altered curbstone pattern that is, as you can see, highly uncomfortable to sit on, to keep undesirable people away. And I mean, this is a very literal example of how social surface, or surface is always social or antisocial. And this is something that I've been observing with a certain amount of anger and compassion for many, many years in public spaces and places. That on the left is the Vatican, on the right is Versailles Castle. You have a long line of women standing, queuing up for toilet, whilst men just freely walk in and don't have to wait. And I've always thought this is so insane. Like, why did not a single architect think about that the duration and use of a toilet varies between men and women, and and one should really assign a different size footprint to the ladies' toilet rather than the men's toilet. And so again, this is this is completely visual. This is something you see, but it completely refers to underlying social, cultural, economic structures. It raises questions. Well, we can talk about that for a long time. And architecture I have been fascinated by for a long time, and because it is, again, this, I guess it's an image of the human desire to control, and then it, of course, the failure to control everything. And every landlord, every person building a building, and every architect, tries to somehow find a good, possibly the best answer to the given, usually quite universal brief of making a building, like how to make a roof. And every architect in that moment would probably be thinking that this is quite a good solution. And then when you look at the world all over, of course there are almost endless amounts of solutions to the same questions and working in varying degrees and qualities. Um, and and what is then created is pure on the day of inauguration and probably photographed on that day without people and no cars in front, and then it's left to its own devices, and soon later an air conditioning unit will be attached outside a window. Then a neighboring house is blocking one view, and ongoing alterations of use and climate influence completely overgrows the purity that existed once, and I don't deplore that. I don't. I find that it's just fascinating how this control and chance and how architecture and cities are this ongoing negotiation of different parameters and are the result of endless amounts of human decisions and the social, political, economical, cultural ambitions behind it, intentions behind it. And so architecture played a role in exhibitions. Really, in the first Taschenbuch from '95, already there is architecture present, but I was never thinking I could do real justice to all these observations and thoughts that I collected over the years. And about 8 years ago or so, I had this title, Book for Architects, came to my mind, and since it came back like maybe once or twice a year, Book for Architects, and thinking, not against architects, not criticizing them, celebrating it as much as showing how do buildings look to my eyes. And I found that most architecture photography is an idealized version and is not really what it looks like to my eye. And so I photograph architecture not with shift lens, not with wide-angle lenses. I photograph it with the lens that approximates the most closely to what it feels like to my eye. And in 2000, well, when was it? Last year was the Architecture Biennale in Venice. Rem Koolhaas invited me to contribute to his exhibition Elements of Architecture, in which he dissected the varying elements of, not varying, the certain elements of buildings. And in the last room, I showed this work entitled Book for Architects, which was a 42-minute two-channel video installation of about 500 pictures from 37 countries over 10 years. Which sort of was the opposite strategy of Rem's isolation of the elements and showing how all the, of course, this is this ongoing cacophony and interference of them all interplaying with each other. This is downtown Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, where the government deliberately lets every old building fall apart until it's beyond repair. And this is, we've seen a lot from Ushuaia today, and this is called Ushuaia Favela, and it is an example, like from the book Neue Welt, and I found that in this group of pictures that emerged from roughly 2008 onwards, under the name Neue Welt, there was always technology somehow in each work, either be it behind the lens or in front of the lens. And in this case, for example, it's a computer-aided designed polystyrene packaging, which an inhabitant of this shanty town used as heat insulation against the cold. Another way of dealing with the surface. This is called device control, and it's from 2005 and taken in Moscow, which, preemptively predicting what might happen, and then it happens. This is a work from 2 years ago from the Silver family of pictures, which have been an ongoing interest of mine since the late 90s. And Tom spoke about them briefly as well. And they are purely mechanical pictures where the photographic process depicts itself. What you see in this case, for example, the image giving material is actually not inside the emulsion. It is sitting on top of the emulsion. It is. They are made feeding paper, some exposed, some unexposed, through a processing machine which has not been cleaned for a long time, or which is in the process of cleaning, or where the chemicals have been taken out and been replaced by water, or varying degrees of active or non-active chemicals and exhausted chemicals, and what then sort of sticks onto the gelatin, because the surface of a photograph is gelatin, which attracts and absorbs, is the material that is washed out of the print in by the fix and developer. And these I then scan at an extremely high resolution and enlarge them then as C-prints to 228 centimeters long edge. And this sort of interface between materiality in the picture, in reality, and the intermediate stages of how is this matter depicted is something of ongoing fascination to me. This could be ink on paper. It turns out to be a glacier. It turns out to be a receding glacier, which 25 years ago looked very different. It turns out to be a color picture. It's a color negative color print, and not black and white. This what looks like any club scene in a small town club turns out to be taken at one of the last two remaining lesbian and gay clubs in St. Petersburg, and a city which in the late 90s was boasting a vibrant scene, and nobody could ever have imagined that human rights would go backwards at that point. and so in this entire empire of Russia, which stretches 10 time zones, St. Petersburg is the most liberal of all cities in this 10 time zone empire, and in this most liberal city, lesbian and gay communities have been pushed back so far that there is literally only 2 little clubs left, and so these boards are the world for some, a place where you can be who you are without fear. And so nightlife and politics are always very close connected. And I went 3 times to St. Petersburg last year in relation to the Manifesta exhibition at the Hermitage, and curated by Kaspar Koenig. And in the last visit, I made 10 interviews and portraits of lesbian and gay activists who were happy to be photographed and were happy to be shown what they wanted to show their face, and thought it's important to show the face because, of course, some people say it doesn't matter, like what you do in your bedroom, why talk about it? Of course, it is extremely political. It is not just a private matter, and I showed this picture. Then I published these in ID and online, and then they asked this year if I could exhibit them in St. Petersburg for a small mini queer fest that they were doing in September, and they wanted this visibility, and then at the same 2 days before their exhibition, I had a massive exhibition at David Zwirner in New York, where I also exhibited this as a big print and exhibited the magazines like this on the wall, and had sent this picture of the dance floor and the portraits in smaller formats to St. Petersburg in a tube. Something I've been aware of since early on, this economy of how I show work, that I can send an entire exhibition in a tube for 70 euros FedEx bill, and it went there, and they hung it, and it was literally closed within a day. I wasn't the only artist; there were 4, and no picture was pornographic whatsoever. The building manager who allowed this basement to be used for this small exhibition was fired, and I mean, that's where we are in some parts of the world. This is a view from David Zwirner this summer, autumn. So maybe, there's more to say, but I think I just show you. I think we are having 3 pictures that are good to show. Talk one more time about this interest in matter. What is matter? Well, that's a big. Sorry, I don't ask that question. It's stupid. What is matter? This prize is getting too mean. So matter is. No, have a look yourself. This I find a great, a picture I was really, and I'm really happy with. Interestingly, it happened en route to the European Northern Observatory, where Marek gave me access, connected me with them, and I was able to visit and spend a night at the observatory on the island of La Palma. But I had time to visit the beach, and there was this incredible foamy water, and as we know, there are infinite amounts of waves and types, but there again, there was this question: is this possible? Can I do this? It was way after sunset. It was not bright at all, and again, thinking about the camera, pushing it to like what can be done here, and I managed to get a 4/1000th of a second exposure in low light, and and making a picture which is kind of uncanny, like a bit spooky. This reality that is manifest there for 4/1000th of a second that we don't know of, that is just happening without us being aware, but we're right in front of it. And of course, every photograph is a time grab. It never comes back. It just never comes back. But it's somehow super tangible in front of this print. And what I do is also often to do with what I don't do. It's choosing what you do, but it's also very much about choosing what I don't do. For example, not clear this plate, not wash it for 2 days, and let the melon juice, actually settle in sediment, and let the liquid and the solid parts separate, and just sort of, like it's sort of a little mini like laboratory, seeing what happens if I don't do something. Maybe laziness had another little role in that, but and so this observation of a modest fascination and with the chemistry that surrounds me, the photographic chemistry, but also medical chemistry, pharmaceutical chemistry, that keeps us alive, or some of us who need it. And so I have on multi-levels this fascination with what is this. I know I can't answer it, but I have a longing to touch it. And in this exhibition there is this work which is called 17 Years Supply, which shows HIV medication, which I've been taking for 17 years, which keep me alive, but which stand here not as a reference to my personal condition, but as a symbol to any kind of life-saving medication, which are molecules designed by humans, and a substance, are ideas turned into substance, and they are hanging together with the silver prints, which are this other miracle of chemistry, which is the photographic process. And I think we can carry on, but maybe let's stop here. Thank you.